Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Well, the comeback fell just a little bit short on Saturday as Virginia Tech falls to Rutgers inside Lane Stadium and falls to 2-2 on the young season. We got the football crew. We're ready to unpack it all. It's episode 377 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. And we're coming at you recording on a Monday, September 23rd, 2024, from our high-tech studio at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content, and for Virginia Tech students, of course, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, and the Tech Sideline podcast is also brought to you by The Hokie Way. The Hokie Way thanks Virginia Tech fans for their support of our mission to leverage student athletes' name, image, and likeness in support of charitable organizations. To learn more about us and the organizations that we support, visit thehokieway.org. I think some introductions are in order. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way, senior staff writer Andy Bitter. In the fourth chair, it's our managing editor, David Cunningham. And, of course, pushing the buttons behind the scenes, the mustache man, Mr. Nick Brown. Well, we're going to talk about the game, but I want to ask everybody, kind of setting the table a little bit here, how did you enjoy the festivities of the day? Chris, where were you at? Where did you watch the game? Of course, making your way to Lane.
I thought there was the weather was great.
Yeah.
So when you walk through the parking lots and everybody was out tailgating, I saw David's parents. So I went to hang out with them for a little while. Told them a lot of embarrassing stories about him, of course. But yeah, it was a great day for football. It was, the weather wasn't great. I mean, it was kind of cool for the first home game against Marshall. But this one was not too hot, not too cool. I thought it was a pretty good day. You work on your tan a little bit, I suppose, out there. Just wish the result had been a little bit better. You
guys were ready to rock pretty early, tweeting your pictures in the press box around, 11 or noon on Saturday?
Noonish. Never a good thing when you come into the recap pod. You're like, the weather was great. Probably not a great outcome to talk about if that's the case.
Yeah. Well, we'll get right into it. Virginia Tech falls to Rutgers 26-23 in front of a Lane Stadium sellout crowd. Hokies trailed 14-0 after the first quarter and 16-7 at the half. Ended up coming back in the fourth, tied the game at 23-all. A late surge there for Virginia Tech. Had a chance, minute 56 left to go, to show what you're made of, put together a game-winning drive, trailing by 3, and instead Virginia Tech goes 3 and out. And on that third down, they threw an interception that effectively ended the ball game. Now we're in a situation where Virginia Tech is staring 2-3 in the face with a road trip to Miami on Friday and a cross-country trek to Stanford the following week. Gentlemen, your immediate reactions on Saturday?
My immediate reactions are, it's a disappointing start to the season because you put yourself in a position where, let's say you lose to Miami and Clemson, which, will probably happen. Then you have to go 4-2 in your other 6 games to get to 6-6 and become bowl eligible. And I didn't think we'd be having that conversation this year. But it's a long way to go. We'll see. But it's disappointing to see. It just doesn't seem like a team that has progressed. It seems like the same team last year, with the exception that Tech hasn't played 3-9 Pitt or 3-9 Wake Forest or somebody like that. They took care of business against Old Dominion and Marshall, but they completely out-talent those teams, which they should do. But in their 2 matchups that were relatively even, they failed the test. But that's something coming into the season that we said we need to see them beat some teams with a pulse this year, or a team whose coaching staff isn't out the door. And they haven't done that so far, and that's disappointing.
Yeah, and what did we say coming into this game? You're not going to beat Rutgers with a less than a 60-minute effort. Offense was a no-show mostly for 3 quarters. 2.5 quarters before the defense really, bowed up and started stopping that one play that Rutgers seemed to run over and over, like a video game hack that they found that they kept getting big yards on it. It's not like we haven't addressed slow starts this year and talked about it on this podcast and in all the things we write, and somehow they still can't stop it. They're down 14-0 before the game starts. What's the one thing you can't do against Rutgers? Fall behind and let them sort of grind out the clock. And I think they had a massive time of possession advantage in this game. I mean, it's going to wear you out. It's going to wear down your defense. And, this is not a Virginia Tech offense that is built to come from behind and win games. We've seen that. They're really good when they're front runners, when they're out front and they have a lead and they can kind of grind it away and win it. But if they're behind, I mean, that's almost a death sentence for this team. They do not often come from behind and win.
David, your thoughts?
It felt very similar to the Vanderbilt game. Virginia Tech falls behind early, didn't get much going in the first half. Felt kind of lucky that the Hokies were in the game late, had a chance to win late. I mean, tied things up, and then things don't go your way at the end. But Tech just looked lost for an entire first half again. Virginia Tech had that 8-yard the touchdown drive where Bashal Tutin scored on a jet sweep in the first half. But besides that, they had a 3-and-out. They muffed a punt. They had a turnover on downs. They had another 3-and-out, and then safety from Kyron Jones. So it's like when you can't get anything going offensively, and then you look at the other side and they couldn't stop them. It's like, these nothing's going to change if this team keeps having bad starts. And then you get into all the other details of everything else that went wrong. And, Rutgers basically running the same play over and over and over, and Tech couldn't stop it. And it took too long for the Hokies offense to get going. I didn't think Bashal Tutin got the ball as much as he should have, even though he isn't banged up. Just there are a lot of little things that are wrong, it feels like, in the big picture of a program that is not in a good place right now.
The other thing, the Hokies were fortunate to even be in that game at that point. I mean, Rutgers missed 2 field goals. One was a really long one. I don't really know why Schiano attempted that one there. They turned the ball over, once on downs, once on a fumble inside the 5-yard line. Again, I don't quite know what Schiano was doing going for it on 4th and 1 there when a field goal would have made it at that point. I think a 19-point game. Yeah. I mean, it's over at that point. 19 points based on what the Hokies had done offensively. So I don't know that, people are like, Schiano outcoached Prize. Like, that might be true, but I don't think he coached a great game. I don't think they made some good decisions in certain spots. And yet they still won the game. And that just kind of tells you where Virginia Tech is right now.
Yeah, there's 2 ways to look at it. You're like, a really close game. Virginia Tech had a great opportunity and they blew it. But if you're a Rutgers fan, you're probably thinking we could have been up 30-7, or best case scenario, even 40-7 if you score in those opportunities down inside the 5-yard line. So just not an inspiring performance for Virginia Tech.
Gio, I think the worst thing is that Rutgers did not play a good game. Like, it wasn't like Kyle Monangai ran for 200 yards on Virginia Tech. I thought last year's Rutgers performance was honestly more impressive. Just the way they moved the ball down the field and kind of pounded it. Virginia Tech had every chance in the world to really win this game from start to finish. Had better chances late only because Rutgers let them hang around. But Rutgers didn't really impress me. And I think if you're a Virginia Tech fan, that's probably the most frustrating thing. Because it wasn't like, oh, man, we lost this really, really good Rutgers team. We lost to this team that kind of let us hang around, I think. That's the way you look at it.
Couldn't agree with you guys more. Let's break down the offense for Virginia Tech a little bit more on Saturday. Rutgers outgained Virginia Tech 422-320. The Hokies amassed 183 yards on the ground, 137 through the air. A bright spot, though, is definitely Bashal Tutin. Led the way with 15 carries for 122 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's now scored 2 touchdowns in 5 of his last 6 ball games.
Except for the game where the buy-sell was 2 touchdowns.
True.
Yeah.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Because I missed that one.
Right, me too. Yeah.
Like I did most of the buy sells this week, too. Not a great week.
No, but that guy's a monster. He had 10 forced missed tackles this past week. He now leads the country in forced missed tackles with 30 in 4 games. He's just having a great season. 3 straight 100-yard games. To put that in perspective, he only had 4 100-yard games all of last season. So he's really hitting his stride right now, despite playing with a giant knee brace. on. So fortunately, there was no point at this game where he went down, kind of holding his leg like he had the last couple weeks. So maybe he's going to get even healthier from here on out. I would still like to have a bye week right now to get that guy healthy, but he's playing at a really high level.
Could you imagine what he's capable of if he had an offensive line that was just clearing huge holes for him, or a passing game that was taking attention away from the running? I mean, he's playing in this offense that is not doing that well, and he's still putting up these stats. So pretty impressive on his part.
Kyron Drones followed him up. He ran for 65 yards of his own. Wanted to ask you guys, what took the offense so long to get going again? I feel like Brian Kelly, remember, he hits the table. We're having this conversation again because you had a punt, a turnover on downs on the first 2 drives, a touchdown on the 3rd drive, but then you punt, safety, halftime, fumble, punt, turnover on downs, and then finally you get the scoring going in the 4th.
I don't think there's any one thing you can you can point to. I think there's a number of things that need to be fixed. I think it's fair to say they've got, in my opinion, got some coaching issues on that side of the ball. The offensive line is not exactly dominant. Drones is very hesitant to throw the football. Even on the safety, I went back and broke down that play yesterday. I even put a screenshot on our boards where, he had his primary read wide open, and he just hesitated to throw it. He gave kind of a hitch, and then he just stood there and never took his eyes off of him. And eventually Clements got pushed back into him. It wasn't a great play by Clements, not by any stretch, but Drones should have gotten rid of the football. It was a basic pitch and catch in college football, and he just never threw it. And then he also had his secondary read coming across the middle wide open. That could have gone for a pretty big play, but he just never got his eyes over there. And it's just not clicking for him right now in the passing game. And when you combine that with an offensive line that's having some issues, and you are what you are at this point. That's three games in a row where he hasn't thrown for 200 yards, and that never happened last year over a 3-game stretch of any of his starts. He never went 3 games in a row without throwing for 200 yards. 2 of those 3 games have been for under 140 yards. So you can't say that. I don't know, Ollie Jennings is out, but Ollie Jennings was out pretty much all of last year too. So it's just really a struggle, and there's not one thing I think is the issue that you can say, well, if we change this guy out at left guard or whatever, that it magically fixes it. There are multiple issues.
Would you believe it that this was the best pass blocking grade that Virginia Tech has had against an FBS opponent under Pry?
No kidding.
The only game that was better was Wofford that first year. And I know the Clemens play gets a lot of attention, and he gets pushed back into him, and Kyron flips the ball out the back of the end zone. That looked like a video game glitch or something like that. You're like, okay, I'm resetting after this nonsense. But it feels like the pass block, as much as people want to rag on that instantly, and Parker Clemens, what's he doing in there? It's like, well, they don't have better options right now. Right. If there was a better option, they probably would be playing him right now. But that actually held up okay in that game, and I think Drones is just a tick off. You saw those 2 deep balls to Felton. He was open.
Yeah.
If you put it up higher, put it out, make it a little bit easier for him to run under it, hit either one of those, the complexion of this game is completely different. And look at what they did last year in the Pitt game with a deep ball like that, what they did in the Syracuse game. It really changed the trajectory of those games early on when they hit on those, and they're just not hitting on those right now. There's a 4th and 10 pass where they had Lane coming across the field, and it was a low throw, and if Lane goes down to catch it, maybe he doesn't keep his feet and can't get to the sticks. But if it's a foot higher, it's on the money. He's on the run, and it probably goes for another 15 yards or something like that. It's just like small things like that. He just seems off, and I don't know if that's a confidence thing, if they're trying to make him something he's not by staying in the pocket and being a pocket passer. I don't know if it's defenses, how they're approaching him, if it's just all zone and they're making him read all this stuff and he's just not processing it quick enough. I don't know exactly what the problem is. We'll see if Pry says anything about that today. They have the press conference today, but something just seems slightly off with Drones. And he's such an important part of this offense and was such an important part of how this team surged at the end of last year. They have to figure that out. And if they can figure that out, I think they can salvage something of this season. But right now, just something seems off.
Yeah, that's dead on. And he had another pass in the game that was like a basic 5-yard out, and he just threw it right into the dirt, never even got to the receiver. And
he was looking for Gosnell.
Right. So you can sit. They'll say he's confident that he's got confidence, but he's not playing like it. if you had confidence, you wouldn't be so hesitant to make throws. And he's just so hesitant right now. And that's probably even messing with his technique to a certain point where he's throwing the ball into the ground like that. So he's got to go out there and have a good game and at some point and maybe get some of his confidence back and get into a rhythm. But yeah, right now it's just not there for him. I don't know exactly what his numbers are this year, but like he's not passing the eye test. It's not about the numbers. It's just his play. When you look at him, like Andy said, it's just a tick off.
I'm glad Andy took it where he did, because written in the script was missed on a handful of shots, ... 2 to Felton, ... 4th down lane. So yeah. Andy hit all the points. What you got, David?
Well, Andy mentioned the pass blocking. I mean, the only sack in air quotes on the day was the safety. That was the only sack Virginia Tech gave.
Oh,
up.
Sweet. So I got that buy and sell this
To
week.
be fair, that should have counted as like 3 sacks. That's fair. You lost 2
buy or
points.
sell is 2
points,
plus.
I know, but I'm just saying.
But I went under.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, it's not like, yes, Jones was under pressure, but it wasn't like, I mean, I thought, again, in pass blocking, the line held up all right. I think it's more of, as Andy and Chris touched on, more just Drones is just not right now. And I think it's all the more reason why Tootin needs to get the ball more. He only had 15 carries, and he's not 100%. But you said he forced 10 missed tackles?
And 15 carries.
On 15 carries.
That's nuts.
I mean, this guy, I went in, I wrote my notebook after the game, focusing on Tootin. His yards per game numbers are up 47% from last year. He was averaging about 67% last year. He's up to almost 98 yards per game. Mm-hmm. Like, he already has 7 rushing touchdowns. He only had 10 in 13 games last year. He's playing out of his mind. All the more reason why the Hokies need to go to him more. And one of the things I went back and looked at some of the drives and I couldn't really understand. You know, I think running the ball would help Drones get into a little bit more of a rhythm where he doesn't have to pick up big gains, only a couple here or there. But there were a couple different drives where Tootin just didn't touch the ball. And it just feels like a lack of consistency across the board.
7 touchdowns at this point in the year is kind of crazy when you really think about it. Wanted to ask you guys this. We talked about Kyron Drones. I'm down on the sideline during the game, and someone asked me, why does it take to the fourth quarter to wake up, right? And the point I had kind of brought up was, well, granted, it's year 3. You have a first-time head coach, a first-time OC, a first-time DC, and it just feels as though they're not making the adjustments on the fly, and it takes till late in the game for them to diagnose, okay, this is how we can beat this. They're not making the adjustments to win.
I would agree with that. You know, Price said after the Vanderbilt game, it took us a half to make adjustments, which is too long. It took them 2.5 quarters to adjust to that passing play Rutgers was doing. So the acumen, sometimes I wonder, like the football IQ of some of the players and the coaching acumen of some of the coaches doesn't seem to be there. Like, case in point, right before halftime, after Tootin breaks off that long run, you got it with 5 seconds left or something, and you're going to throw a Hail Mary. Like, the only way you're scoring is if you throw a Hail Mary.
Right.
Tech threw it to the 20. Like,
it was interesting. I didn't quite know what they were doing. If they were trying to catch him by surprise by throwing it short and trying to run in.
So it's like, okay, maybe they're going for a hook and ladder or something like that. So I went back and watched the replay on the condensed version yesterday, and no, it just looked like a regular. He just threw it to the 20. I don't understand it. It just doesn't make any sense. So and that's a basic. Like, there was no other way to score there. If you're not going to throw it to the end zone, you might as well take a knee. I don't know, man. It's just that sometimes the decision making. I mean, from coaches and players, no one's without criticism here. Just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it takes them so long to get going. And I think if there was an obvious answer, they would just fix that and they would do it. I mean, we ask them every week, why the slow starts? And like, guys, we're trying. We're trying to do stuff to change that. I think there is something to be said about adjustments in the game. And I mentioned this in my 5 thoughts. It's like, what was Bud Foster legendary at? Like, intensity, yes. Motivating, yes. Also, how many times did like the opponent just like go straight down the field on the first drive? Everybody's like, all right, this is going to be a long day. And then they just did nothing the rest of the game because Bud's like, all right, I saw that. Here's our counter. We're stopping that. And then there's just no offense for you the rest of the game. Like, I feel like I saw that a couple times with East Carolina in some of those games. It's like, oh, this is going to be a long one. And then they finish with like 200 yards in the game or something like that. Now that's a Hall of Fame caliber coordinator we're talking about. So it's unfair to compare, current coordinators to somebody like that was so legendary when he was here. But I mean, that's sort of the difference you see sometimes. I think, obviously with that one play that they ran over and over and over, that's something they had to adjust to quicker, and they just didn't do it. I think if you have somebody like Bud on the sideline, certainly he would have adjusted that quicker. So maybe that plays into it a little bit, but I don't know. Sometimes it's tough to put your finger on it. Like, why does this team always do this every single week? It's like, well, we tried things different and it's still not changing. What's wrong with it? So sometimes it's a tough thing to fix.
Last thing on the offense here, guys. It did get working. Obviously, you scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Don't know how you're in the game at that point. We're going to talk about the defense and some of the decision-making on the other side we had already hit on. But you get the 2 touchdowns, the 2 two-point conversions. Clearly, something started to click. What was that?
I think they got it to the outside a little bit more. I thought it was interesting that like 3 of the big runs by Tootin were when he was split as a wideout and went in motion and took the handoff and attacked the edges. It seemed like Rutgers was vulnerable on the edge, but Virginia Tech didn't really attack it. They attacked it on their touchdown drive of the first half, and then they attacked it towards the end of the game. But
so we like jet sweeps now.
We love them.
Is that where the position of the fan base is again?
I've always liked.
You just got to run into the wide side.
Right. Because when Leffler ran him, people didn't like him. When Cornelison ran him, people didn't like him. Even though it was like their best play statistically over those 2 years. But now we're back on board with jet sweeps.
I've never been off board with jet sweeps personally.
I'm talking about the fan base at large here.
Fair enough.
But 2 of Tootin's touchdowns were. I mean, one was outside to the right, untouched. One was outside to the left, untouched.
Right. And,
were they both to the wide side too?
I don't remember that, but
I don't remember.
Nick says yes. Yeah. Nick says yes. Yeah, you can't run a jet sweep into the boundary. That doesn't typically work. Well, as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. And as our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, and it helps to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet all of your banking needs. That includes free checking. So visit firstbank.com to find the account that is right for you. All right, guys, let's talk about this Virginia Tech defense. The Hokies, kind of keyed in on what everyone said they had to do, which was this Rutgers elite rushing attack. Held Monungai to 84 yards, so buy or sell did not hit, and all of us bought 125 or more. He did have a touchdown on the ground. That was well below his season average up to this point. Held Rutgers to 187 yards on the ground as a team, but did get a little bit carved up through the air at times.
Yeah, if you'd told me the Rutgers was going to average 2.9 yards per carry for the game, I would have told you that, Virginia Tech, good win, right? Virginia Tech was going to win that football game. I would not have guessed that, it was a lot of yards, but they had the ball so much partially because Virginia Tech couldn't pick up very many first downs offensively. But I wouldn't have thought that was Kalik Monis's 3rd highest passing output of his career. So if you told me, they're going to hold Monungai to 84 yards, Rutgers is going to average 2.9 yards per carry, and Kalik Monis is going to torch you, I wouldn't have seen that coming. So I was very close to picking the final score right. I had Rutgers 27-23, but the path to the final score was not the path I envisioned.
Yeah, I mean, they brought him in to be a more effective passer than what they had last year with Wimsatt, and I think it was their most passing yards in a game in 23 games. You had to go back to the Iowa game in 2022 when they threw for 300 against Iowa, which is
that's weird.
I know, Rutgers, Iowa, you would not think they'd have even 300 yards in a game.
They didn't score on Iowa last year.
So weird. I think I have that stat looked up. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I just screwed that stat up. But it was an unexpected, big passing day. And you look at Virginia Tech's defense, you go, hey, the pass defense is supposed to be a strength here. They cranked it up in the fourth quarter, and they started getting to him, and a couple sacks there, and the momentum really changed in the stadium there. But I feel like they got out schemed in that game. I mean, you stop the run, but okay, this little pass out in the flat, this crossing pattern is open every single time. Really only stopped it. I mean, they stopped it sort of twice. They got the 4th down stop in the 4th quarter, and they also, sort of a crossing pattern, maybe not the exact same thing when they got the fumble at the 2-yard line. That's sort of a fortuitous situation there, though. But like you said, if he said Rutgers is only going to run for this much, Monangai has this much, I'd be like, hey, that's a great job by this defense. So I felt like they met the physical challenge of this game for the most part. There were times where they didn't, but not the tactical challenge of being out schemed there.
Andy, you had mentioned it, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. Thoughts on Greg Schiano's decision to not only go for it on that 4th down, but pass on 4th and 1. They're on the goal line, 7 minutes left in the 3rd. Kicking a field goal would have made it a 26-7 game. It ultimately kept the Hokies in the game, but granted that crossing route was working. They chose to pass on 4th and 1. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that play had worked every single time, so they were like, let's try it until it doesn't work.
Well, it worked every single time.
When you have the whole field,
Virginia Tech had done nothing on offense to that point, basically. The last time you handed the ball to them at the 2-yard line, the quarterback threw it out of the back of the end zone under duress. So maybe he's thinking like, okay, then we can this is like an attitude play here. Let's just
step
get this
on
in
their
the
throat.
end. Right. But for the more, you think about it, like 3-score game versus 16 points, 2 touchdowns, 2-point conversions. That's exactly what Virginia Tech went down and got. Yeah. So he sort of unintentionally opened the door there by, being overly aggressive. I feel like that's the new thing in football. I've got to be aggressive all the time. Field goals are evil and stuff like that. Sometimes taking 3 points is not the worst thing in the world. I'm a person who always calls for people to go for it on 4th down, but I think you just take the points and say, all right, score 3 times. I don't think he can do it.
I want to point out with regards to their passing game, they only targeted Virginia Tech's corners 3 times. And one of those was that screen on the last drive. They technically attribute that to Dorian Strong because that was his receiver or whatever. But yeah, it was they just didn't bother going after Tech's corners. They said, nope, that's not a battle we're going to win very often. So we're just going to challenge them in other ways. And so that's really the disappointing part is like you're not challenged outside the hash at all, unless it's underneath, right? So you've got your other 9 defenders to defend a much smaller area of the field because your 2 corners are shutting it down on the outside, and yet you still can't do it. Those guys should provide a big schematic advantage for Virginia Tech because it should give more options on how he defends the rest of the field, but it's not happening.
How well run was that screen? I mean, that was perfect timing. They hit him, and if they force him to the inside, he gets a good gain, but he doesn't go for 60. Mm-hmm. And it looked like Jalen Jones kind of jumped inside to try to make the tackle, and that allowed him to get to the sideline. Then he's off to the races down there. It felt like Virginia Tech was going to come back and win this game, amazingly. And all of a sudden they flip the field. They're down there. They can work the clock. It was just such a deflating play after they had done such a good job to get back in the game.
Well, I totally agree with you on that. I almost think it was for the best because if Rutgers just methodically is able to chip their way down the field and then maybe Tech never even gets the ball and they kick a walk-off field goal type thing, but with that big play, all of a sudden you got the ball back with 1:56. I don't know if that was the case if the big play doesn't happen. But
Rutgers hadn't done anything in the second half up to that point. So I'm going to disagree with you and say that they should not have given up the 60-yard play. Crucial. I know it's controversial, but that's the take I'm going to have. I think you try to stop them. You give up the 15, 20 yards, whatever that play goes, and then you live to play another day. And they're still in their own territory. You could still get the ball back if you get to stop the next 3 downs.
Yeah, at that point, you're kind of sitting there thinking, okay, we finally figured out their one play that was working, and then they haven't run it all that successfully today, so you're starting to feel good about it. But at the same time, when Virginia Tech tied it up, I was happy like everybody else. But yes, at this point as a Virginia Tech fan, it is in your mind. It's like I can tell you I did not feel confident, and I should have because the game was going in Virginia Tech's direction at that point. But like this team, this program at this point, for me, it's about trust, and I don't trust them to win games like that. Even when it seems like they should, even when it seems like they have all the momentum. The Rutgers game, the Vanderbilt game, like those games were going in Virginia Tech's favor, and then bam, there's just a massive breakdown at the end of the game and they lose. So it didn't seem like they were going to lose either one of those games because they had the momentum and things were going, but they managed to do it. So yeah, I mean, even when it seemed like they were about to win or force overtime or whatever, I wasn't supremely confident, and that's just how I'm as a fan right now, personally. Like if I wasn't a Virginia Tech fan and it was somebody else's team and I was analyzing, I'd be like, yep, they're going to win. They've got all the momentum. But since it's my own team and I watch them every week and I've seen how they've done in games like that over the last 3 years, I didn't have much confidence, oddly enough.
Well, Pry's 1-9 record in one-score games does not inspire confidence. The one win they had was against Liberty. Against a Liberty team with a head coach who was pretty checked out at that point. He knew he was going to Auburn. I don't feel like they got Liberty's best in that game. Not to take away from that win, but it was the facts of the matter. But that is the problem with this team right now, is that it's just not doing all the little things you have to do to win games like that. And whether it's slow starts or, not adjusting to certain plays or giving up a big play at the wrong time. I mean, those are the things you have to prevent. And not to say you're going to prevent all of them, but you have to prevent enough of them so that you can come out on top in a tight game. And this team's not proven they can. And that's concerning going forward because, maybe not this week because, all the fears Hokies fans had last week about getting blown out that I was making fun of, which they didn't get blown out in this game. I think Rutgers was a pretty similar team to Virginia Tech. I think those are warranted this week going against Miami. I think Cam Ward's playing at a level, Miami hasn't had a quarterback in a while, and I think that changes what this team is capable of. I think this one could get ugly this week if the Hokies don't respond. But then looking at the rest of the ACC schedule, you're going to have to win some close games here. You're not going to run through teams like last year where, I think I put in my 5 thoughts. They didn't beat a team last year that finished the season higher than 80th in the SP Plus rankings. Every team remaining on the schedule is higher than 80th now. I think Stanford is 75th, the worst. Gio knows this. No pushover with Stanford right now. That team looked pretty tough.
No pushover. That Alec Iomanner's a good
tough.
receiver.
I mean, who would you say are the 3, quote unquote, easiest games on the schedule? Stanford, feisty. Duke 4-0. I mean, argue with how they got there. They're 4-0. UVA 3-1 at this point.
They've already won as many this year as they did all last year.
UVA doesn't look like they did last year. They didn't know exactly what they're doing. They look feisty in some of these games. So I don't think you're just going to run over anybody on the rest of the schedule. You're going to have to win some of those tight games. This is not a staff or a team that has proven over the last 3 years that they're capable of doing that.
To the defense's credit, including the 2 missed field goals, Rutgers came away empty on 7 of their last 9 drives. That's not including when they ran out the clock. Those 2 scoring drives resulted in 10 points. It was enough to win the game. But what did Tech's defense do schematically, Chris, that kind of shored things up and gave them a chance?
Oh, well, I mean, I think Price said it after the game. He said Rutgers doesn't do a whole lot offensively, but what they do well. Schematically, they're not going to go out there and offer you a whole bunch of stuff and like really mentally challenge your linebackers and things like that. So from a mental standpoint, this game was easier than the previous few games. It was very much a middle drill type of game. They just happened to have wide receivers and defensive backs on the field, right? So I think from a mental standpoint, it was easier. Tech did answer the bell physically. I thought they played their toughest physically game of the year. That being said, the issues in the running game for Virginia Tech run defense have been mental mistakes. There will be other teams that challenge Virginia Tech more from a mental standpoint than Rutgers did on Saturday. So I was pleased to see the progress, but I also think schematically there will be greater challenges on the horizon.
Isn't it interesting how fine the line is between this team, overtime against Vanderbilt, certainly could have won that game. Down 3 at the end with the ball with 2 minutes left. Had just gone straight down the field on 2 straight drives to score. I mean, could have easily won this game. And this conversation is completely different.
Right.
If they come through in the clutch in either one of those games. I mean, even the Vanderbilt game, they had the ball at the end, tie game, and couldn't move it anywhere. So, I mean, I wouldn't say this team is like miles away from competing, but man, those little things and just not coming through is the difference between, hey, they're unscathed in the non-conference schedule, even if they haven't played that great, to they're 2-2 and the season is on the brink.
Yeah, I think that it's a perfect example of like, I think there's a whole lot of college football teams, like from like the 30th ranked team to like the 65th ranked team. There's not a whole lot of difference between them. It's about matchups each week and the fine margins of the game. The talent levels between all those teams are fairly similar.
So would you call this team inept, or would you say they're not inept at this point?
Is the glass half full or is it half empty? Right.
That was one of the questions directed at Pry. He bristled at that
I
one.
saw that. I saw that. Yeah.
I would have
watched
phrased
that.
it like that. I would say the offense has struggled at times. I don't know if I'd call them inept.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Because when they do look good, they look good.
The lulls are obvious.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
some
true. But
30-minute lulls. 30.
I
to
think you're
35
probably
minute.
not getting the coach's best answer if you fire out with an inept. Although it did produce a great answer. So, what
It
can I
did.
say?
And that is the head coach that called his own offense vanilla 2 years ago.
That's true. There's a pretty wide gap
But
between
vanilla
vanilla
sounds
and
nice, and inept sounds like a jab.
It's okay when you say it about yourself, but it's not okay when somebody else says it about you, right?
Right. We're going to go to David in just a second, but it didn't end up mattering all that much. I thought it was a phantom pass interference on Mansour
Nah, it's a
Delane.
terrible call.
Yeah, it didn't.
I was
didn't
looking at
look
the
right.
replay. I'm like, where was it? Unless it was out of frame before they got to that point. But
Well, and then if it
pretty
was out of frame,
ticky-tack
it would have been
call.
holding, right?
Right,
Instead of,
pretty ticky-tack call for that situation.
could have cost him. Luckily, it didn't. The defense kept things locked down. David, what you got for us?
Yeah, when you're in close games, you have to do the little things right. And I think we have seen that Virginia Tech has struggled to do that. Hokies turned it over 3 times. I think that Jalen Lane muff punt was killer. And that's 4 special teams errors in 4 weeks. And yes, Lane kind of made up for it later, but when you give Rutgers the ball on the second drive of the game at the 31-yard line, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Rutgers went and scored there to go up 7-0. First play of Tech's first offensive drive in the second half, Kyron Jones fumbles. And that was the drive Rutgers went down to the Virginia Tech 1 and turned it over on downs. But that could have easily been 28-7. And then I look at some of the other little tiny things that went wrong too. Tech only had a few penalties, but a couple of them were silly. I mean, freshman Quentin Reddish had a late hit on one of the early drives that extended Rutgers' play, tacked on 15 yards to a 19-yard passing play on the first drive of the game. Rutgers went down and scored. Before it didn't come back to bite Tech, but before Tech forced the fumble inside the 5-yard line, Aeneas Peebles jumped off sides on 4th down. Tech credit to Mansour Delane, who's 3 turnovers he's helped force in 3 weeks. He and Kelly Lawson, forced a fumble inside the 5. But if they don't do that, I mean, that was a silly play from Aeneas Peebles, a veteran who should know better than that to jump off sides. You throw in turnovers and you throw in some penalties, and it just felt like there are too many little things going wrong for this team that if you want to have a chance to win close games, you can't do, let alone if you want to win them. And I just look across the board and go, yep, that makes sense. Yep, that makes sense. Yep, that makes sense when I see it, right? It's not really surprising now, but it kind of explains, I think, a little bit why Tech has struggled in these close games. When you can't do some of the little things right, when you turn it over, you have silly penalties. The Delane penalty, Gio, you mentioned, the PI, that was a bad call, but there were just too many little silly things, late hits, holding penalties. And it's not just this one game, too. How many holding penalties have you seen bring back? I go back to the Vanderbilt game. Felton holding penalty away from the ball brings back a toot and run that would have put Tech inside the 5, right? You just can't shoot yourself in the foot in close games.
Point of clarification, it wasn't a muffed punt because he actually caught it and he was trying to make a move and then fumbled it. And I'm sure that will be part of the next article that Tristan Raish writes. Whether that was a fumble or not, people are like, it's the wrist. Is the wrist down?
Yeah.
It looked like a fumble to me.
Yeah.
It looked like his hand, and the hand is not considered down at that point. That's... we've written about this. That's 4 special teams mistakes in 4 weeks. Now, I think Tech special teams is actually pretty good, and I think the stats back that up on the whole. You take it in totality and what they're doing there, but man, there's just too many critical mistakes. I mean, it's the double numbers penalty against Vanderbilt, punt blocked against Marshall, field goal blocked against ODU, and now this fumbled punt return. It's not the same thing every week. It's like whack-a-mole. You fix one and then another one pops up somewhere else. So it's just, I feel like that could be such a major advantage, special teams, for this team, if they could eliminate that one huge mistake every game, because they're still making plays. Like Jalen Lane, he has a return for a touchdown already this year, had a big return the other day that sparked things. I think they're solid in other facets, typically with punts, the protection. There's the same play. They brought in the gunner on the side to block it, and this time Dante Lovett recognized it and called it out, and they adjusted to that whole thing. I think that could be an advantage for this team, and that's how you win close games, is if you're pretty good on special teams, but they keep shooting themselves in the foot at least once a game in a major way. And I added up, this cost them 20 points this year.
Yeah.
How important would that come in 2 one-score losses that they've had?
Exactly right. And the nature of special teams is you can do everything right throughout the course of a game except for one play, and that's it. You've lost because of that one play. That's just the nature of special teams.
Quickest way to win a football game.
Exactly right. I've heard that a few times before. So if there's anything Virginia Tech fans should understand, it's special teams and the impact that they can have on a game, even though people don't think about them all that much sometimes. I think, just imagine if the 0-0 hadn't happened, and imagine if Jalen Lane hadn't fumbled. It's possible Virginia Tech was 4-0 right now. Now we'd be sitting here saying, gosh, we got a lot of improvements to make, and that number 18 ranking next to our name or whatever is the most deceiving ranking. Right. Yeah,
I would rather be called fraudulently ranked than
correct.
2-2. Can you make a bowl game?
That's exactly right. That's exactly.
I would trade that off.
I would trade that off. But yeah. We would be sitting here saying, man, we've got issues, but at least we're 4-0 and we've given ourselves a chance to improve. And, there's still everything to play for. Instead, you're 2-2 and you're like, oh, man, bowl situation right now is certainly not definite the way I see it.
Andy, in your article, you had characterized this game as a roller coaster. From one extreme to another, you had mentioned that this comeback could have been the shining moment under Brent Pry's tenure to this point. Why is that?
Well, for starters, there's not a whole lot to choose from. I mean, they had that great run last year. I'm not denying the great run last year, but we've pointed out the level of competition they have. Even the bowl game, it's like, Tulane was a 10-win team. It's like, that wasn't the 10-win Tulane team that they were playing in that game. That was a hollowed out shell of that team that had its backup quarterback, backup coach in. That quarterback got hurt too and came out of the game. So a lot of extenuating circumstances there. And then you go back to the first year. It's like the Liberty win. That was the shining moment of the first year, was the Liberty win. So I think when you look back on coaching hires, you're like, well, what was the win that sort of got people to believe or to turn things around or get things going? And it looked, pretty bleak there in this game for a while, and you're down by 16 points. If they could have rallied in the fourth quarter to get not only 2 touchdowns, but 2 2-point conversions, then come down after a field goal and go and win the game at the very end, I think that would have been something people go, man, resiliency. This staff never gave up. These players never gave up. And that's something that you can build on the rest of the year. And certainly you'd be feeling a lot better at 3-1 right now than 2-2. But it didn't happen. So now it felt like a missed opportunity, and like you could have been so close to like, all right, things aren't great, but they're still not horrible. And then now you're down at the bottom of the roller coaster again going, I don't see another win on the schedule. I mean, I do. I'm just saying that's what a lot of fans on the message boards are saying. They're going to the extreme other end of this whole thing.
If you sit there and you make the mistake of reading through every Twitter comment and everything on the message boards, it seems like we're getting to a point where the fan base, many of the fans, some, maybe not many might not be the right word, some are starting to be out on this coaching staff being the one that turns it around. Mm-hmm. Where do we sit as that?
I mean, take it to a year ago. It was the exact same conversation when they're 1-3. Like, Bowen ain't it, Marv ain't it, Pride messed up the coordinator hires. I feel like it's just a replay of that exact same moment. Now, there was a pretty major change in the offense that they made last year. They got things to turn around in that season. I don't think that's necessarily coming this year because I don't think that's available to them to make as drastic of a change like that. But when the team is losing, people jump off the ship pretty quickly, it feels like. Yeah,
I mean, my take on that is this team does need better coaching. Now they've got 8 games to turn that around. And it was at this point last year when they were 1-3, where I've said I was done with them. I was 100% convinced they were going to go like 3-9 and not have a good season, and coordinators getting canned and all that. And then they turned it around. 2019, I was 100% certain that Virginia Tech was done after that 2-2 start. And then they went down to Miami and were up 28-0. And
drastic change to the offense.
Drastic
Hendon Hooker
change to the
goes in,
offense.
they run the ball a lot more. So
Exactly right. And that said, this Miami team is not 2019 Miami. Like, that was a 6-7 Miami team. This is a Miami team that is harboring pretty legitimate thoughts of going unbeaten with a Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback. I know they always seem to have a slip up somewhere, but this is a much better team, it seems like, than most of your recent Miami teams. And certainly it's not the 3-9 Pitt team that Virginia Tech turned it around against last year, or the 3-9 Wake Forest team. So it just doesn't seem likely that lightning strikes twice. So you're probably looking at a 2-3 start. And gosh, doesn't that make that Stanford game so important? Because the differences between 3-3 and 2-4 are pretty significant, I think.
Also, let me clarify my statements. I think there's more validity to the criticism that they're having about the coaching staff and whether this is right now, because we're talking about 25 games in. I mean, this is year 3. This is when you're supposed to start seeing progress. This is, all the continuity they had, all the returning production that they had back. You would expect a step forward, and you're not really seeing it right now. Last year, it was still figuring things out. It was they're still trying to iron out, how bad this roster was that they inherited, and putting guys in the new pieces. It feels like this was the year where they had guys in the proper spots, and they had the talent. They'd shored up the receiving room, and were supposed to be better on the offensive line. And returning quarterback for once in the last a decade and a half, it just doesn't happen at Virginia Tech a whole lot. And I think that's what's adding to the complaints about this whole thing. And to be fair, I think those are valid criticisms of how things have gone.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think 7-6 isn't a great year, but it is a winning record. And if you can't be excited about bringing everybody back from a team that had a winning record, then when can you ever get excited as a fan? Right?
Right.
So I
the
think
answer is never, Chris.
Apparently.
Never allow yourself to get worked up.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I'm a Vikings fan, so I can't relate to this. The 3-0 Vikings. I'm booking my Super Bowl tickets already.
Okay.
Surely nothing will go wrong with that plan down the line.
They got a great defense, though.
They do, but if you've studied Vikings history,
yeah,
they'll let you down.
They've had a number of great
defenses. Oh, they'll let you down.
Yeah. It's wild how 7-6 last year felt in a lot of ways fantastic, especially the way the season started. And I think if you finish 7-6 this year, it leaves a completely different taste in your mouth.
Completely different, because like I said, you want to see progress in year 3, and especially with so many players returning. And it also fills you with a lack of confidence for next year, because you lose so many seniors off this year's team. Now, if you've got the transfer portal, there's always going to be more turnover in the offseason these days. So things could change dramatically. But, as far as the coaching stuff goes, yeah, I mean, we're having the conversation too much about we feel like they got out schemed. When you've had that conversation twice in the first month of the season, then against the Rutgers staff and the Vanderbilt staff, I see it. I don't see like any coaching pushovers on the remainder of the schedule. Tech might actually go down and out-coach Miami, but it might not matter, because Miami's got a Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback. I have a tremendous amount of respect for what Troy Taylor did at Sacramento State. He did a great job with that program, and Stanford seems improved in his second year. The Georgia Tech staff is good. The Boston College has an NFL head coach, right? I mean, that guy knows what he's doing from an X's and O's standpoint. I think the coaching challenges are more significant than they were last year. So right now, yes, I think that's probably something that's going to have to be addressed in the offseason. But again, they proved me wrong. I said the same thing after 4 games last year. It's possible they could prove me wrong again this year. I hope they do. I kind of have my doubts on that, though.
This is sort of the burden of expectations, and a lot of people are like, oh, the media talked them up on stuff like that. It's like they talked themselves up too. I mean, Pry said at the ACC kickoff that he'd be disappointed if they didn't play in the ACC championship game. That's not the media making that up at that point. That is Pry setting goals for this team that he thinks are within reason. And he was saying it sort of matter-of-factly, like it wouldn't be a stretch. He'd be disappointed if they didn't get there. So, we can talk about outside expectations that were created, blocking out the noise and all this stuff. There were internal expectations for this team too that they are not meeting, and I think that is got to be a source of frustration for this. I think Pry was not his usual self in the post game. Usually he comes in, he's like, thanks to the fans, the Military Appreciation Day, great to have. What was the team they were celebrating that was out there? I didn't. Which championship team? Yeah. It was the Hall of Fame class. That's how Tyrod Taylor was there. He usually thanks all that stuff, and this time they came in, he's like straight to questions.
Yeah, I noticed that when I watched it.
So it was a little bit different from that, and then he got hit with the inept question, and I think it just kind of threw him off his game a little bit. But yeah, I mean, this is a team's got to figure things out because they had expectations, and like you mentioned, I think next year. You wanted to be on an upward trajectory, like sort of not peaking, but showing what you're capable of. And if you're only capable of 6-6 or 7-6, what does that tell you for the outlook of this program in the future?
Let's check in with David one last time before we wrap up the show today.
I've got some numbers. So Andy talked about, Rutgers would be the best win. It had Virginia Tech pulled it out, it would have been the best win under Brent Pry. I just went and ran the numbers, updated them with numbers from this year. Virginia Tech won 3 games its first season, 7 games its second season, and 2 games this year under Brent Pry. Those teams have finished with a combined record. Of course, that's up. Obviously Marshall and Old Dominion are still pending. Those teams have had a combined record of 56-75, which is 42.7%. Mm-hmm. That tells you the teams Virginia Tech beat were not good. And that includes an 11-win Tulane team, the 11 wins from a Tulane team, right? That obviously was not as good. So I just wanted to give that context. Something we didn't talk about at the defense, Gio. Antoine Powell-Ryland finished with a sack. And then after the game, he was... official stats always goes back and looks to check and see, if it missed anything. There are plays, of course, that the coaching staff can submit and say, hey, did you see anything different about this? One of the plays that was adjusted was Aeneas Peebles' sack right before Antoine Powell-Ryland's sack. Peebles and APR kind of got there about the same time, and they gave APR half a sack. So Antoine Powell-Ryland now leads the nation in sacks with 6.
So Virginia Tech has 2 national leaders. Forced missed tackles, Bashal Tootin, and Antoine Powell-Ryland in sacks. 2 national leaders. How about that?
It is awesome.
Something about Tootin. I went and looked. Since Virginia Tech joined the ACC, there have been 4 running backs, with 3 straight 100-yard games or more. Ryan Williams in 2009. He did it 8 times total. He did it 5 times in a row and then 3 times in a row. David Wilson did it 7 times in a row in 2011. There was a reason why he was ACC Player of the Year. Yeah. Khalil Herbert did it 4 times in 2020, and now Bashal Tootin's done it 3 times. And I also went and looked. I'm going to grab my phone for this one. I filtered players who averaged at least 8 yards per carry, which is what Bashal Tootin did on Saturday, on at least 15 rushing attempts. That has happened 14 times since Virginia Tech joined the ACC in 2004. The first one to do it was Marcus Vick in 2005. This was the first time Virginia Tech lost a game in that span when that happened. And that includes Marcus Vick against Maryland in 05, Brandon Orr against Southern Miss in 06, Tyrod Taylor in 08 against Virginia. Ryan Williams did it twice. David Wilson did it twice. Darren Evans did it once. Khalil Herbert twice. Raheem Blackshear once. Hendon Hooker once. Kyron Drones did it against Tulane last year, and then Tootin did it against Rutgers. So
you're saying Tootin's pretty good?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's the bottom line. Probably obviously talks about as Drones goes, Virginia Tech goes, but they gotta.
Can you imagine this offense if he wasn't in it?
Tootin?
Yeah, that's why I'm really concerned about his knee, and they've got to keep him on bubble wrap throughout the week, because if he's not on the field, like how are they going to move the football? Yeah, because they can't pass it, and they clearly don't have any confidence in any of their backup running backs, it seems.
You mentioned Tootin as a national leader. Do they hand out like a trophy at the end of the year for the missed tackles?
They
champion?
don't. They should.
Some sort of belt.
They should. Yeah. I'll give him.
That's not the college awards ceremony. The
No,
missed
it's
tackle
not.
champion for the season.
I thought that mouthpiece that he wears that says "Beware of Dog" that was already a trophy in itself.
he's a
Feels like that's
monster.
something you got to earn, and he's done it.
Yeah.
The last thing I think is just injuries. Xavier Chaplin. I thought what Xavier Chaplin did was impressive. I mean, he went down, was carted off the field, and then only missed a 2-point conversion.
He Paul pierced it.
Crazy.
He came back on and played the rest of the game. Price said he went and got X-rays, and they said he was fine. A couple other guys got banged up, including Kyron Jones. Looked like he got his foot and ankle stepped on, and he continued to play. Ollie Jennings, Cole Nelson and Mansour Delane both got banged up and came back. Ollie Jennings missed this game. He was again banged up against Old Dominion. Interested to see if he's like the way some of the guys talked about him after the game makes it sound like he just needed kind of a week off and he'll be maybe back for this game against Miami. And then some of the other offensive linemen like Laith Ganem probably said he was medically unavailable. So a couple injuries here or there. And then Tootin, man, I mean, it's funny. I think it's going to be a situation where I don't know if he's ever going to be 100% healthy this year, but it doesn't matter because he still looks pretty good.
He still looks pretty good. Yep.
Lastly, guys, what's coming up this week on Tech Sideline? I know. When do you guys start heading out of town? Who's hosting on Wednesday? David's hosting on Wednesday. Will be in the fourth chair, so a little bit of a mix-up because Bill Roth insists we're hitting the road bright and early on Wednesday. So
really? On Wednesday, huh?
So
Are you
I'll miss
driving?
you guys. We are driving.
Oh gosh.
Well, I'll see.
Do you know how big Florida is? That is a
Yeah.
long
I've driven to
drive.
Miami before from Blacksburg. It takes a long time.
You hit the
Yeah.
Florida border, you're like, hey, we're making pretty good time.
So
Like,
Bill's not-
Florida is the longest state ever. Like other than Texas, it takes forever to get through that state.
It disappoints me. So I'm on ESPN Radio every Thursday. I'm on right after Bill. So when he's done with this segment and before I start my segment, we always talk about the last game and the upcoming game and all that. So I won't get to do that this week. That's a shame.
Well, he'll be in the car, so I guess he's not gonna. He's not gonna.
I could call him.
I was gonna
you
say.
could put him on speakerphone and we could all talk about it.
We'll be in the car for what, 15 hours?
Yeah, you got plenty of time to kill.
The whole gang and Bill. It's gonna be a good time.
It's a good thing you all get along because that's a long car ride.
Yes, yeah. We'll see. Everyone's gonna have to have scheduled stops and everything.
Yeah.
I could see it taking a while with a crew that big. But what's coming up this week, guys? Pod on Wednesday.
Yeah,
previewing Miami.
and preview. Everything kind of gets pushed up a day, and I've still got to totally evaluate the schedule and everything and figure out. It's a short week, right? So it's a short week for the team, and it's a short week for us. It's not a great time to have a short week when you have to go on the road and you have a number of injuries and you're playing a top 10 team. I think it's a big week for Tech this week. I heard Pry had some very pointed comments to the players in his post-game speech this past week, which kind of explains, what you were talking about. He wasn't the same in his post-game media conference. Just seemed a little more down and not as upbeat as normal. So I think there's some things about this team that are really bothering him. So I think this is a big week to try and get things back on track, not from a win-loss standpoint, because that's not likely, but from a mentality standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, and all those little things.
Yeah, condensed week. So we got the press conference today. We requested drones. They did not give us drones this week. I mean, drones, Cam Ward, they work out with each other in the offseason. I think they're cousins.
I think that's right.
Actually, they have the same quarterbacks coach. So heaven forbid we be allowed to write about that storyline. I'm still going to write about drones regardless of whether we get him or not at some point. But I also have more details on the Metallica thing that I haven't had a chance to go through because they did the interviews on Saturday for some reason.
Yeah, that I did notice that. That was bizarre. What you got, David?
Yeah, I mean, short week, so everything's moved up. So press conference today, practice tomorrow. Andy and I, we're out on Thursday. We're leaving Thursday morning. So, yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a – I thought Rutgers was a measuring stick. I think we learned a lot, honestly. And now Tech has to go right the ship. And I'm interested to see Pry's demeanor when he talks to us. I mean, I don't know. He's had a couple days to – He's past the 24-hour rule. He's got to get it out of his system and whatnot. I'm sure he'll be fine, but you can kind of tell, I think, that the fan base is starting to circle a little bit. I think that's a good way to put it.
Definitely. And I think that puts a ribbon on it for today. Thanks so much to our presenting sponsor, as always, First Bank and Trust Company. Thank you to the Hokie Way. For Nick Brown behind the scenes, for David Cunningham, for Andy Bitter, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long, safe travels, enjoy watching the game, and enjoy the preview coming up on Wednesday.